The tomb was never meant to be opened, yet the sands shifted and revealed what the galaxy had tried to forget. 1,000 years of silence did not erase the echo of those who once lay entombed there. Walls carved in sigils that predated human script breathed with a rhythm too deliberate to be the product of time. Even before the first step was taken inside, the ground whispered warnings through vibrations that clawed at bone marrow. What was buried here had not decayed. It had been waiting. Before we descend further, if this story grips you, remember to keep it alive. Like, share, and subscribe so the chronicle continues to echo across the void. The story will unfold in 20 chapters. Each moves deeper into the tomb, into history, into memory, into something far older than mankind's empire. The desert stretched without mercy. A horizon where sky and sand dissolved into each other until direction itself became an illusion. Wind screamed across the wastes, lifting entire walls of dust that shredded skin and choked lungs. Each storm carved the land anew, reshaping it in ways that no map could predict, erasing tracks before boots finished pressing them. For most, it was a graveyard of patience. For the patrol, it was a duty to walk where no life should be, to ensure no heretic, no raider, no Xenos remnant dared linger where Imperial eyes could not see. The squad moved in silence, their vox grills muffled by static as the storm pressed against them. Each footstep sank deep, as though the ground itself resented the weight of their presence. Granules of sand clung to lenses and filters, grinding against ceramite like tiny blades. Still, they advanced. They were soldiers of the Imperium. Discomfort was not permission to falter. Yet, beneath their boots, the dunes shifted with a rhythm too unnatural to be mere erosion. The earth yielded not like loose grit, but like fabric stretched over something vast and unyielding. It was Trooper Varric who first noticed the glint, a shard jutting from the dune's edge, blackened yet gleaming, its surface sharper than any stone. He reached down, brushing grit aside, and the fragment caught the storm's dim light in a way no rock should. Its edge had not dulled, though it had been buried beneath centuries of crushing weight. Alloy, unfamiliar, untouched. He lifted it, and the shard hummed faintly, resonating not with the storm, but with his own pulse. Sergeant Corda ordered a perimeter, boots planting hard into the sand as lasguns raised to the storm. Varric lowered the fragment onto the ground, and together they uncovered more. Each sweep of their gauntlets revealed lines, curves, and angles buried just beneath the shifting surface. They were not scattered ruins. They were segments of design, cut with precision so exact it felt blasphemous to name it coincidence. The sandstorm howled louder, as if protesting their discovery. Grains lashed at exposed armor joints, infiltrating seals, grinding through filters with relentless malice. Yet the squad worked faster. By the time the storm began to ebb, the outlines of something greater had emerged, a surface of black alloy stretching in impossible symmetry beneath the dunes. It did not corrode. It did not fracture. It simply endured, every line straight, every angle sharper than anything human hands could forge. Corda ran his gauntlet across the exposed metal. It was cold, not with the chill of stone, but with an absence deeper than temperature. A void pressed outward, rejecting heat, rejecting life. His vox clicked with hesitation before he spoke. Not Imperial. The words were unnecessary. None had thought otherwise. The patrol spread further, uncovering more fragments, some rising like teeth through the sand, others buried deeper, still connected to structures none of them could imagine in full. What they revealed was not ruin. It was perfection preserved beneath a world that should have erased all trace. Varric swore he saw the lines pulse faintly, like veins channeling light just below the surface. Others dismissed it as the eye's rebellion after staring too long at black on black. Yet none could shake the weight pressing against their chests, as if the desert itself had been a veil draped over a body that now stirred beneath their hands. Hours passed, though time meant nothing in the storm's grip. The patrol's rations dwindled, water rationers grinding against parched lips, but no one spoke of retreat. They had been trained to endure hunger, thirst, and pain, but curiosity was a harder torment. Each new surface revealed suggested a hole far larger than the mind could grasp. The sergeant marked their location, stamping coordinates into his data slate with hands that shook despite discipline. Protocol demanded reporting, yet protocol faltered in the shadow of discovery. They were no longer explorers, no longer guardians of barren soil. They had become witnesses, and witnesses bore burdens heavier than war. As dusk fell lower, what passed for dusk, beneath a sky still stained with sand, they stood before a clearing of alloy, wide enough for a squad to march abreast. The wind fell silent, not eased, not slowed. It was as if the storm itself had been severed, its sound cut clean away the moment the clearing was revealed. Varric's shard, still clutched against his armor, vibrated with faint urgency. The desert no longer felt lifeless. It felt watchful. Every uncovered angle seemed part of an eye, every line a muscle preparing to move. The dunes were not random. They were shroud, and in peeling it away, the patrol had done more than trespass. They had awoken geometry that had been waiting, patient as stone, merciless as time. When the first tremor coursed beneath their boots, subtle as a heartbeat, no one spoke. Sand collapsed inward, grains funneling toward some unseen depth. The fragments they had uncovered hummed together, resonance building in low tones that pressed against the skull like distant drums. The patrol raised weapons, but against what? The desert, the ground itself. Sergeant Corda gave no order. None was possible. The storm resumed beyond the clearing, but within it, the air remained perfectly still. Every man felt the same realization seep into his bones. This was not ruin. This was not chance. The desert had not hidden death. It had hidden design. The tremors did not cease with the storm. They rippled through the earth in measured pulses, neither violent nor chaotic, but deliberate, as if the land itself obeyed a rhythm beyond comprehension. The patrol staggered, boots sinking deeper into the sand, until one dune collapsed in silence, pouring itself into a sudden hollow. Where there had been only grit and stone, there now yawned an opening too smooth to be natural. The desert did not erode into this shape. It obeyed. Sergeant Corda signaled a halt, raising a gauntlet fist. The squad formed a perimeter, lasguns trained on the void, though none could decide where to point at the collapsing dune, at the fragments of alloy now thrumming beneath their boots, or at the darkness that opened beneath them. The silence was wrong. The wind still tore at the dunes beyond, but inside the hollow, no grain stirred, no echo returned. The absence of sound felt heavier than noise, pressing against ears until eardrums rang with the pressure of nothingness. Varric moved closer, his visor lens capturing the faint shimmer of sand sliding across invisible edges. He froze mid-step when the void seemed to recoil, not with sound, not with motion, but with presence. A weight pressed outward, not physical but undeniable, halting him as effectively as any barricade. He swore under his breath, voice cracking in the vox grill, yet he could not step back. It was not compulsion. It was recognition. The gate acknowledged him. Without command, the sand gave way in full collapse, draining into the hollow until the surface revealed itself entirely. Black alloy met stone, fused without seam, curving in arcs that defied the humanized ability to measure them. It was not a door, not in any sense the Imperium would name. There were no hinges, no seams, no mechanisms, and yet it began to move. The alloy folded inward, not breaking, not sliding, but bending with an impossible grace. It did not resist its own weight. It obeyed some deeper law. The soldiers could not describe it. Some swore it looked like liquid folding in on itself, others like stone melting in silence. The truth was worse, looked like neither. It looked like a wound reopening, as though the planet itself had been cut long ago and now remembered the pain. The gate did not open to space or chamber, but to more silence. Darkness stretched inward, so pure it devoured the squad's lumen beams before they reached more than a few meters. Corda raised his vox, reporting coordinates in clipped tone. Though the signal cracked with distortion, his words seemed swallowed, reduced to static, as if the tomb resented their attempt to mark its location. The data slate flickered, recording, erasing, recording again. The men shifted uneasily, fingers tightening on triggers. No order came. None was needed. Each knew the same truth. They had not found an entrance, they had been permitted one. Crossing that threshold was not like stepping through a doorway. It was surrender. The weight pressed harder as the first troopers moved forward, their armor creaking under strain, not of mass, but of will. Every instinct screamed to resist, to remain in the storm's fury, rather than submit to stillness. Yet step by step, they crossed, until the gate folded closed behind them, with the same soundless finality as it had opened. Inside, there was no storm, no wind, no echo. Their breath rasped against vox grills, deafening in the absence of all other sound. Lumen beams carved narrow cones into the dark, revealing walls smooth as glass, yet carved with glyphs, too intricate to be mere ornament. The lines bent and coiled in geometries that seemed to shift when stared at too long, forming patterns that pressed into the skull rather than the eyes. Private Jaren whispered a prayer to the God Emperor, his voice trembling, but the words came back twisted, as if the vox carried not his prayer but something else entirely. The others shunned him with silence, unwilling to let their own words be reshaped. The floor sloped downward, drawing them deeper. Their boots struck alloy, yet the sound of their steps was consumed, leaving only vibration in their bones. Varric reached out and brushed the wall. It was not cold. It was absent, a temperature so neutral it felt unnatural, as though heat itself had been forbidden here. He pulled his hand back quickly, swearing he felt something stir beneath the surface, like muscle flexing. They marched in formation, their lumen beams revealing only fragments, a curve that could have been archway or rib, an indentation that could have been ornament or scar. The tomb refused to reveal itself in whole, only in pieces, each fragment more unsettling than the last. Then the corridor widened. The beams of their lamps fell upon a vast chamber, its dimensions beyond comprehension. The ceiling disappeared into darkness, its walls curving not inward but outward, as though they stood inside a hollowed sphere. At its center loomed a second structure towering, seamless, pulsing faintly with a rhythm that echoed their own heartbeats. Corda raised a clenched fist again, halting the squad. His voice rasped through the vox, clipped and tense. This isn't natural. Nothing here is. He did not need to say more. Each man already knew. The gate had not granted them entry by chance. The wound had reopened because it was ready, and what waited beyond was not ruin, it was my intention. The descent led them into stillness, thicker than any storm. The chamber stretched onward, so vast it seemed carved from the marrow of the world itself. Columns rose in unbroken symmetry, each towering structure shaped into the likeness of figures not entirely human. Their faces bore sockets where eyes should have been, hollow recesses that gave no reflection, no life, no comfort. Yet the patrol felt the weight of their gaze. It was not the sensation of being watched, but of being anticipated, as though these statues already knew each man's steps, choices, and failures before he had lived them. Their lumen beams slid across the stone and alloy alike, but the light seemed weaker here, swallowed before it reached the full span of the chamber. Each column caught the glow in ways that bent perception. Shadows stretched longer than physics should allow, draping across the soldiers' boots even when the source of light stood far behind. Trooper Varric muttered that it felt like walking through a memory sculpted into stone. Every angle set not to inspire awe, but to confirm inevitability. Sergeant Corda barked for silence, yet his voice cracked in the vox. carried back to him a half-second too late. As if the chamber had judged his words before returning them, Private Jaren clutched his Aquila pendant through his armor, whispering another prayer, but the words withered in his throat. The sockets above him seemed to drink them in, leaving nothing for the Emperor, nothing for his own ears. Fear turned to anger, and he tried again, louder this time. The result was worse. The sound bent, reshaped, until what left his lips was no longer imperial tongue, but syllables that carried resonance, not his own. He tore the pendant from his neck and stuffed it back beneath his armor. His silence returned, but not his faith. They pressed forward, rifles raised, though no enemy moved. The hall echoed with their steps, yet each man swore the echoes arrived before their feet touched ground, a sound preceding the cause, an action predicted, not remembered. The realization gnawed at them. If their movements, their sounds, their very thoughts were anticipated, then their freedom was illusion. They were not exploring, they were repeating. The columns themselves seemed alive in stillness. Each socketed face leaned downward in subtle tilt, their features uniform, yet imperfect, as though sculpted to mimic something the sculptor could not fully grasp. No two faces were identical. Some stretched too long, jaws unfit for human skulls, others compressed with angles that spoke of geometry, not biology. They were not statues of men. They were statues of possibilities. Every soldier found a different familiarity in them. Varric swore. One column mirrored the features of a comrade, long dead on another world. Jaren saw his mother's cheekbones in another. Even Corda faltered when one socketed visage seemed to bear the stern set of his own jaw. The realization twisted through them, like blade. These were not guardians. They were catalogs, records of what was, what might have been, and what could be again. The eyeless sockets drank each recognition hungrily. As they moved deeper, the columns grew closer, narrowing the path. The men's formations broke, forced into single file. The pressure of the unseen gaze thickened, pressing into their skulls until even thought felt crowded. Each time one man tried to focus on a memory, it slipped away, replaced by images, not his own. Battlefields he had never stood upon. Skies he had never seen. Voices calling in languages his tongue could not form. The hall was not showing them visions. It was inserting them, rewriting their memories as if rearranging notes in a hymn. Corda halted at the center, raising a clenched fist, but his men did not need the signal. They stood transfixed by the statues looming on either side. The sergeant's vox crackled, his voice hoarse. These are not for us. They were never meant for us. Yet even as he said it, he could not look away. None of them could. The hall demanded attention, demanded acknowledgement, demanded surrender. The deeper they marched, the more the sensation grew that they were not intruding upon the tomb. They were being processed by it, examined, judged. One trooper broke, firing a lost burst into the nearest column. The shot struck true, scorching the stone, but the mark faded instantly, the alloy beneath rejecting all trace of violence. Worse still, the sound did not echo naturally. It rang through the chamber a full second before the shot was fired. The squad hearing the discharge in anticipation before the trooper's finger even pulled the trigger. By the time the bolt of red light flared, every man already knew it had happened. No rebuke came from the statues. They remained still, but the weight in the chamber deepened, oppressive as a held breath. Every socketed face seemed to lean closer. The trooper who had fired dropped to his knees, helmet clutched between both hands, as if his skull might split open from the pressure of unseen thought. The others dragged him forward, unwilling to leave him, unable to stay. The hall pressed them onward, narrowing further until it formed a funnel that emptied into an archway at the far end. Unlike the gate before, this threshold bore no seams, no hinges, no wound. It simply existed, carved from shadow into shape. Beyond it, the darkness was deeper still, layered with something that pulsed faintly like breath. The patrol stumbled as one, forced into the passage. Their steps no longer belonged to them. Every motion, every sound, every thought had already been read, weighed, and accounted for. The statues had not watched them. They had known them. The passage opened into a chamber where the air itself seemed alive, though nothing in it could truly breathe. Along both walls, stretching into gloom beyond the reach of lumen beams, lay rows of sarcophagi hewn from black stone. Their surfaces were polished to a sheen that reflected no light, each lid engraved with lines that curved like veins, coiling into patterns too intricate to belong to any human artisan. At first glance, they seemed inert, sealed relics of a forgotten age. Then the soldiers heard it, the faintest sigh, not of wind, but of exhalation. A mist rose from the cracks between the lids and their bases, curling upward in threads that dissipated into the cold air. The vapor smelled faintly of metal and ozone, sharper than promethium but tinged with something sour, something that clung to the tongue as though tasted more than inhaled. It did not drift randomly. It pulsed. Each sarcophagus released its breath in unison, then fell still, then exhaled again. A cycle without heartbeats, without blood, without flesh, yet undeniably alive in rhythm. Trooper Varric took a step closer, unable to stop himself. His gauntlet brushed the side of one lid, and he recoiled instantly. It was not heat, nor cold, but the sense of contact was something that had not consented, as though the stone resented the touch. He swore he felt the rhythm alter, the mist quickening for a single breath before settling back to its cadence. Sergeant Corda barked his name, pulling him back with a hand that gripped like iron. "We observe," Corda said flatly. "We do not disturb." His voice cracked with effort, as if command itself was an anchor against what the chamber demanded. The patrol pressed onward, weapons raised, though useless against what lay within stone. The mist coiled around their boots, clinging with damp fingers before retreating to the sarcophagi. No lids shifted, no hinges creaked, but every man felt the expectation. These were not coffins. They were lungs, machines of fleshless respiration, caught in cycles that had not broken for millennia. They breathed, not for what lay within, but for what was yet to awaken. Private Jaren's voice cracked through the vox, trembling. "They're alive." The words hung, heavy, until Varric spat back. "No, they're waiting." Neither sounded convinced. As they moved deeper, the sarcophagi changed. The engravings grew more complex, their lines curling into fractal spirals that seemed to move when stared at directly. Some lids bulged subtly, as if something beneath pressed outward against stone. Others sank inward, hollowed like ribs collapsed under strain. And still, the mist came steady, endless, unbroken. One trooper faltered, his knees striking the alloy floor. He clutched his helmet, gasping through filters, as if drowning in air. "They're inside me," he stammered, voice breaking into static. "Breathing through me." The others hauled him up, but his body shook as though his lungs no longer obeyed him, matching the cycle of the stone instead of his own will. The rhythm spread through the squad, each man's breath faltering, sinking unwillingly with the sarcophagi. Inhale when they exhaled, exhale when they inhaled. A grotesque inversion that left them gasping in panic. Corda snapped commands, forcing discipline into their bones. "Match your training. Ignore it." Yet even he staggered when the cycle deepened, the mist thickening to veil the air in gauze-like threads. His chest heaved against the rhythm, his vox crackling with his strained effort to resist. It was not suffocation. It was subjugation. Their lungs were not being emptied, they were being recruited. The chamber widened, revealing a dais at its heart. Upon it lay a sarcophagus larger than the rest, its lid carved not with veins, but with the form of a figure. Unlike the others, it bore a face, angular, alien, crowned with lines that shimmered faintly, as if tracing currents of unseen energy. Its sockets were hollow like the statues before, yet more defined, shaped to a precision that made the absence unbearable. The mist here was thicker, pouring upward like incense, filling the air with sharp metallic temps. Varric whispered through clenched teeth, "It's their master." No one argued. The great sarcophagus exhaled louder, its rhythm a command, the smaller chambers answering in unison. The squad felt the cycle lock tighter, their lungs rebelling, their pulses staggering to match an alien cadence. Corda forced his men to form a line, weapons steady, despite the trembling in their hands. He fired a lost burst into the ceiling, desperate to break the chamber's command. The bolt vanished, swallowed into mist before striking stone. No sound, no mark, no echo. The squad staggered back, retreating toward the archway they had entered. The sarcophagi did not open. They did not need to. The rhythm alone was enough to claim dominion. Each man felt the same truth pressing into his mind. The cycle would never end, not until the lids parted, not until the breath found bodies again. The mist thinned as they stumbled into the corridor beyond, collapsing to their knees, gasping raggedly as their lungs fought to reclaim their own rhythm. Behind them, the exhalations continued, steady as ever, indifferent to their struggle. The sarcophagi had not followed. They had not needed to. The patrol now carried the rhythm with them. The corridor narrowed again, its walls pressed close like the ribs of some colossal beast. Yet, unlike the stone and alloy they had passed before, these surfaces were alive with markings. At first glance, they looked like scars seared into the black metal. Grooves burned deep and glowing faintly, as if embers had been buried beneath. They did not flicker like flame, nor pulse like energy. They remained steady, each glyph etched with such precision, it felt deliberate beyond comprehension. The soldiers' lumen beams illuminated them only in fragments. But no matter where the light fell, the markings continued seamlessly, coiling across the walls in uninterrupted lines, as though the entire passage was a single circuit. Sergeant Corda raised a gauntlet hand to halt the squad, his visor sweeping the corridor ahead. "Symbols," he muttered into the vox, though the word felt wrong, even as he spoke it. They were not symbols. They were not language as humans understood it. They were something between text and design, a structure that wanted to be both, and neither. Trooper Varric stepped closer, his eyes fixed on a spiral of etched lines that seemed to shimmer faintly at the edge of vision. He blinked and gasped. For a moment, he was no longer in the corridor, but standing on a battlefield beneath alien stars. He saw legions of metal figures marching in silence, their weapons glowing with green fire, their eyes like coals set into skulls of steel. The vision was gone as suddenly as it came, leaving him stumbling back, heart pounding against his ribs. "I saw them," he whispered, voice breaking through the vox. "I saw their war." The others looked sharply at him, their grips tightening on their rifles. Corda barked for silence again, but it was too late. Private Jaren's eyes had locked onto another section of glyphs. His body stiffened, as if struck by His voice spilled out in a language none of them knew, words forced through lips that were not his. The squad dragged him back, tearing his gaze away, and he collapsed, gasping like a drowning man. His first words upon waking were a name long, harsh, alien echoing with weight none of them could bear. The realization spread like sickness. The glyphs were not meant to be read. They were meant to be experienced. Each etching was a fragment of memory scorched into alloy, not as record but as contagion. To look was to inherit, to know wars you never fought, dynasties you never served, names you never carried. The patrol tried to move faster, eyes averted, but the glyphs drew them in. Human instinct searched for pattern, for meaning, and the markings offered too much of both. Even peripheral glances struck like blades. One man stumbled against the wall and screamed as his visor struck the glowing surface. His howl rose not from pain but from knowledge forced into him. He spat names of kings, whose bones had turned to dust before Terra's first hive city had been built. He wept for dynasties that had never known humanity, his tears hot against the inside of his mask. Corda dragged him forward, shouting orders through grit teeth, forcing the men to lock step, heads down, weapons clutched as if steel could defend against memory. His own mind throbbed under the weight of visions. He saw cities rise from crystalline plains, towers of alloy that stretched into void, and fleets moving in perfect unison across stars humanity would never name. Yet worse than what he saw was the sensation beneath it, all the conviction that these memories were not dead. They waited, dormant, ready to awaken in anyone who carried them. The squad's march became a stagger, each man muttering fragments of foreign tongues, clutching helmets to keep their skulls from splitting under the influx. Lumen beams swayed wildly, catching glimpses of the glyphs that twisted into new forms each time they were lit. What one man saw as spiral, another saw as lattice, another as scar. Each perspective carried a different recollection, a different inheritance of war and dynasty. At last, the corridor opened into a smaller chamber, its walls curved inward, every inch seared with glowing glyphs. The air itself hummed with resonance, vibrating in the lungs like a second heartbeat. At the center stood a single obelisk, its surface alive with shifting script. Unlike the walls, the glyphs here moved openly, burning with fire that did not consume. They writhed across the surface in constant flux, rewriting themselves endlessly. Varric staggered toward it before Corda caught his shoulder, dragging him back with brute force. Yet even from a distance, the obelisk reached into their minds. A torrent of names cascaded through their skulls, kings and queens. Dynasties rising and falling, wars fought across stars that had never known human footsteps. None of it could be resisted. The chamber did not ask them to remember. It forced memory into them until they could not distinguish their own thoughts from those of beings long turned to ash. Jaren screamed again, his body convulsing as if drowning in names. The squad held him down, but the sound that poured from his throat was not his own voice. It was Legion, echoing with the tones of 1,000 dead tongues. His words fractured into silence as he collapsed, breathing shallow, eyes blank with exhaustion. Corda forced the squad to withdraw, his commands more desperate now, every syllable trembling under weight he could not shake. They stumbled from the chamber, dragging Jaren with them, their bodies shivering as though with fever. The moment the obelisk was out of sight, the torrent eased, though the memories lingered, gnawing at the edges of their thoughts. The walls continued to glow behind them, patient and unbroken, the circuit unending. What they had seen was not knowledge, it was infection. And it had already taken root. The chamber opened with a sudden vastness that stole the air from their lungs. After the suffocating corridors and the weight of glyph-lined walls, the space felt almost infinite, a void carved from the bones of the planet itself. Their lumen beams reached upward and were devoured, vanishing into blackness that seemed to stretch forever. Then, faintly, points of light began to bloom. One by one, they pierced the dark above, steady and cold, until the entire ceiling was awash in stars. For a heartbeat, the squad felt the smallest flicker of relief and instinctive recognition of night skies, constellations, the quiet comfort of worlds long behind them. But the longer they stared, the colder that flicker became. These constellations were not theirs. No navigator's chart, no imperial archive, no charted sky bore these patterns. The stars above were arranged with precision, symmetrical, yet alien, as though some mind had placed them not to guide travelers, but to mark something older than travel itself. Varric lowered his weapon, visor tilted upward. His vox carried the rasp of awe he could not contain. "It's a map," he whispered. The word itself felt treacherous. Sergeant Corda stiffened, forcing steel back into his tone. "It's a deception. Don't trust what you see." Yet, even as he said it, His eyes could not leave the lights. His training, his years of service, all fought against the instinct that gnawed at him. Those stars were deliberate. They were not illusion. They were history. Private Jaren muttered a prayer, voice weak and broken. The Emperor made the stars. These are lies. But the sockets above had no warmth, no faith, no distance. The lights burned like scars in the ceiling, etched with a precision beyond mortal comprehension. When he closed his eyes, he still saw them, seared into his skull, as if memory itself had been overwritten by their presence. The squad spread across the chamber, each man staring upward, their lumen beams forgotten. Shadows pooled at their feet as the ceiling's false sky swallowed their sense of depth. Some swore the stars shifted when they moved, aligning themselves into new constellations. Others claimed the lights pulsed faintly, as if answering their heartbeats. What none could deny was the pull, the sensation that they were not looking at stars painted upon stone, but through it, beyond, into a sky that had once been real. Korda activated his data slate, snapping captures of the constellations, desperate to anchor the moment to record. The slate flickered, its screen filling, not with the stars overhead but with coordinates, strings of numbers that multiplied faster than he could process. It was as though the device recognized the constellations, translating them not into image but into navigation. His hands trembled. These were not decorations. They were roots, a chart the Imperium did not hold. The realization spread through the squad like contagion. These were not stars of the present. They were memories of a galaxy that had shifted. Skies of millennia past, preserved in alloy and stone, now revealed, as though no time had passed. What they gazed upon was not the void as it was the void as it had been. Varric fell to his knees, laughter breaking into static across the Vox. We're beneath the sky of their empire, the one before ours, the one before everything. His words fractured, half-truths spilling from a mind too overwhelmed to cage them. This isn't Tumit's record. They want us to see it. They want us to remember. The stars pulsed in response, a ripple across the ceiling like a breath drawn by the void itself. For a heartbeat, every point flared brighter, their patterns shifting into alignment, coalescing into a single shape. A spiral arm of the galaxy, twisted and reshaped. At its heart burned a dark center, not radiant, but devouring. The squad staggered backward, instinct screaming, as though the chamber itself had turned to face them. Private Jaren collapsed, his hands clawing at his visor, gasping like the air had turned to water. Through broken words, he cried out names, not his own. Systems never charted, dynasties erased by time. He saw armies marching across those stars, legions of metal forms spreading like tide across the void. He begged for silence, but the sky pressed deeper into his mind, demanding memory, demanding acknowledgement. Korda dragged him up, barking orders that carried no conviction. His own eyes watered beneath the strain of what he saw, the scale, the permanence, the certainty. This was not metaphor, this was record. The stars were not guiding them forward. They were showing what had already passed. The galaxy had not always been theirs, and beneath the stone, beneath the sand, beneath their boots, lay the proof of who had owned it before. The squad staggered toward the far archway, refusing to look up, yet the stars followed. They pressed into the edges of vision, clinging to the skull, like afterimage. Even when eyes closed, the constellations burned. Memory had become parasite, refusing to release its host. At the threshold, Varric turned once more, unable to resist. His voice broke as he whispered, "These aren't constellations." He paused, breath rattling. "Their claims." The chamber fell silent, but the stars did not fade. They waited, patient, lightless, eternal. They left the false sky behind and entered a chamber where weight itself seemed to thicken. Their boots struck alloy floors with the same precision as before, yet each impact felt muffled, as though the ground resented being touched. Along both sides of the vast hall stood statues, figures of towering armored form, carved with a fidelity that defied imagination. They wore no imperial markings, no aquila, no sigils of the emperor's domain. Their armor was smooth, angular, seamless, forged in lines that rejected the flaws of human craft. Each bore a weapon across its chest, long and alien. Its barrel curved like bone, and its blade edges sharp enough to make the air tremble. They did not move, and yet the squad halted as one, because the statues did not need to stir to be felt. Their presence pressed heavier than any titan, heavier than the dreadnoughts that slumbered in fortress vaults. It was not threat in the way soldiers knew it. It was patience. Endless, suffocating patience, as though each step taken in their shadow was borrowed from a ledger that would one day demand payment. Sergeant Corda forced himself forward first. His gauntlet tightened around his rifle until the ceramite creaked, every motion deliberate, defiance carved into discipline. The others followed, unwilling but unable to remain behind. Their lumen beams flickered across the statues' visages, and the detail became unbearable. These were not crude guardians of stone. Their features were too exact. Joints sculpted as though they could bend. Fingers carved in positions that hinted at motion not yet taken. Sockets hollow, but shaped in ways that seemed designed to hold eyes once present. Trooper Varric whispered through the vox, his voice thin. "They're waiting." The silence that answered him was worse than confirmation. Every man thought the same thing, but no one dared give it shape. The patrol advanced slowly, each step amplifying the sensation that they were trespassing in a place not abandoned, but observed. Though the statues stood inert, every angle of their pose suggested readiness, legs braced, weapons at rest, yet angled forward, armor tilted slightly as though their heads might turn at any moment. The squad's formation frayed, discipline pulled apart by the invisible gravity of the guardians. Some soldiers moved too quickly, desperate to be passed, while others slowed, unwilling to present their backs to what might stir at the edge of vision. Private Jaren broke rank first, stumbling to the side with his vox sputtering prayers. He pressed his back against the wall, his eyes locked on one towering figure whose armor bore a faint sheen, as though not stone at all, but alloy preserved. He swore he saw its weapon tilt, just a fraction, just enough to recognize the shift. The others dragged him forward, but none could deny that for a heartbeat, their lumen beams caught a glint of reflection on surfaces no sculpture should hold. Corda tried to steady his men, snapping their focus with barked orders. Statues, nothing more. His words felt brittle, like paper armor against the weight pressing from all sides, because deep inside, he knew. Statues did not carry presence. Statues did not impose patience. Statues did not make soldiers feel as though each step forward was being tolerated only by choice. The hall stretched longer than their eyes could measure, each guardian identical in stance, but different in detail, one's armor bearing sharp ridges, another smoothed into perfect curves, another carrying a weapon longer than its frame should support. They were a legion of silence, unbroken, uncountable. The squad's footsteps echoed in rhythm, but the echoes felt altered, arriving back not as repetition, but as anticipation. Every sound seemed already known by the guardians, already weighed, already dismissed. Halfway through, the air changed, not in temperature, not in pressure, but in texture. Breathing felt thicker, as though the oxygen had gained weight. Their filters whined under strain, vox channels sputtering with static. One soldier coughed, collapsing to his knees, and in that instant, every man turned toward the nearest statue. None moved, none shifted, yet all felt the judgment pass over them. The cough ceased as quickly as it began, the soldier rising unsteady, but alive. They pressed forward faster after that, unwilling to linger beneath the stillness any longer than necessary. It came without source. No figures moved within the chamber, no shapes advanced, No weapons gleamed. Yet sound rolled through the air, as if armies pressed against each other in unseen tides. Bolts of energy cracked like lightning, though no fire lit the darkness. Blades clanged against armor, a grinding shriek that set teeth on edge. The walls themselves seemed to shake beneath impacts, yet the floor lay steady. The squad froze, rifles raised at shadows that birthed no targets. Watching as sound itself became battlefield. Voices cut through the din, not in Gothic, not in any human tongue. Harsh syllables cracked across the chamber, filled with command, with fury, with pain. The language carried no translation, yet the weight of it pressed into the men's minds. They did not need words to know what was shouted. Orders, defiance, death. Every tone was sharp with certainty, the kind that brooked no surrender. Private Jaren stumbled back, his hands pressed against his helmet. His vox carried a scream he did not mean to make. They're in my head, the voices. They know I'm here. The others dragged him upright, forcing his eyes forward, but the truth was plain. These were not distant recordings. They were fractures in time, memories carved into the walls so deep they bled still, bleeding into minds that had no defense. Then came the sound of collapse, metal tearing through stone, not once but again and again, as if titans of alloy had crushed their way through fortresses. Dust shook from the ceiling, though no stones fell. The men staggered under the imagined impact, their instincts screaming that the battle was real, even as their eyes found only emptiness. Varric swore through his vox, breath ragged. It's happening now. His words broke into static, his panic undeniable. But Corda snapped back, voice cold steel. No, it's what was. We walk through their graves. He tried to make the words command, but even he felt the lie, because the war did not sound finished. It sounded alive, immediate. Its fury pressing against the walls as though waiting for bodies to inherit it again. The chamber twisted their senses further. Laws beams fired in panic, bolts of red carving into walls that yielded nothing. Yet the echoes returned shots answered by phantom fire, screams overlapping with their own. One trooper fell, clutching his side as if struck. No wound marred his armor, yet his breath came shallow, ragged. He gasped words that were not his, in a tongue none of them knew, before falling silent. They hauled him back to his feet, but his eyes no longer focused. It was as if part of him had been claimed by the battle, as the squad pressed forward. The echoes grew closer, louder, until the air vibrated with impact. The men felt blades whistle past their ears, smelled the metallic temps of blood that was not theirs. One moment, the chamber was empty. The next, it swarmed in their vision, with fleeting shadows. Forms of armored warriors too quick to see fully, their movements jerking like broken picked feeds. They vanished the instant focus sharpened, leaving only the certainty that they had been real enough to kill. At the heart of the chamber stood a Scara-deep fracture, carved into the alloy floor, black as void. Sound poured from it like smoke, the loudest screams and the heaviest clashes spilling upward as though the wound itself bled memory. Varric leaned over it, staring into the abyss, and staggered back with a cry. He had seen legions marching into the void, their ranks endless, their weapons blazing with green fire that tore the galaxy itself apart. His scream cracked into laughter, wild, unhinged. They never lost. They're still fighting. Corda ripped him back, dragging him toward the far archway. His own skull throbbed, with Vision's fortresses collapsing, skies torn apart by fire, dynasties erased in silence. It was not knowledge. It was invasion. The war pressed into his mind, demanding to be carried forward, demanding witness. His vox crackled as he forced words through gritted teeth. Eyes ahead. We leave. The squad stumbled into the passage beyond, each man dragging the weight of battles that had never been theirs. Behind them, the chamber roared on, the echoes unbroken, endless. The war had not ended in silence. It had never ended at all, and now, It had found new ears to fight within. The passage narrowed again, before opening into a chamber that seemed built for reverence. The walls here were smooth, untouched by the scars of glyphs or the fractures of remembered war. Their silence was deliberate, as though the chamber itself wished to frame the object that waited at its center. Upon a raised plinth of black alloy rested a single artifact. It was no weapon, no tool, no ornament the Imperium would recognize. It was a crown. It gleamed without light. Radiance poured from it not in beams or reflection, but in presence. Every line of its design shimmered with precision too exact for human craft. Arcs of metal flowing into jagged points that suggested both beauty and cruelty. No dust lay upon it. No decay touched it. The chamber had preserved it perfectly, not as relic, but as sovereign. The squad approached with steps more hesitant than any taken before. Their boots clicked softly against alloy, their breaths rasping in unison. Sergeant Corda raised a gauntlet hand, forcing his men to halt. Even his command voice, iron-wrapped and unyielding, faltered as the artifact's weight pressed against them. The crown did not move, yet the air around it vibrated faintly, a hum that prickled through armor, seeping into flesh. Private Jaren whispered through his vox, his tone brittle. "It's calling." He was wrong. It was not call, it was refusal. The artifact radiated rejection. Flesh drew back from it instinctively, as if bones themselves resisted union. When Varric stepped closer, his exposed fingers beneath the gauntlet twitched violently, recoiling from the crown's presence before contact was even made. He swore he felt the skin crawl from his bones, as if his own body had declared him unworthy. The hum grew louder as they neared, not with sound, but with vibration, pressing into the marrow. The soldiers felt it in their teeth, in their skulls, in the rhythm of their hearts faltering against its resonance. The closer they drew, the more their bodies betrayed them. Sweat rolled down faces, though the chamber's air was cold. Hands shook, armor felt heavy, lungs staggered in rhythm. The crown rejected them, not with force, but with negation. They were flesh, and flesh was exile. One trooper broke rank, staggering forward, as though pulled. He reached the plinth, gauntlet stretching out. For an instant, silence consumed the chamber. His hand hovered inches from the artifact, trembling. Then his scream split the vox, raw and jagged. He fell back, clutching his arm as if fire had eaten through armor and bone. The others dragged him away, but no burn marked his flesh, no wound scarred his gauntlet. His voice cracked in madness. "It turned me away. It knows what I am." The crown gleamed, untouched, unyielding. Corda stood at the edge of the plinth, visor locked on the artifact. His chest heaved, his gauntlet flexing as though torn between defiance and dread. He forced words through clenched teeth. "It doesn't want us. It never did." Yet even as he said it, he could not tear his eyes away. The artifact shimmered with an authority that was undeniable. It was not ornament, it was claim. The realization sank into them like poison. This was no crown for men. It had never rested on the brow of flesh. It was forged for forms that bled once, long ago, and chose to bleed no more. The soldiers felt that truth as surely as breath. This was sovereignty sculpted for beings who had abandoned mortality, who had turned their backs on decay, on hunger, on time. It belonged to rulers who ruled still. Though their thrones had been buried beneath sand for 1,000 years, Varric staggered forward again, his voice hoarse. If it rejects flesh, then it's waiting for them, for what they were. He paused, trembling, or for what they will be again. The hum swelled, rattling through their armor, pressing against the walls until the chamber itself seemed to vibrate in resonance. Every man fought the urge to drop to his knees, not in reverence, but in desperation to escape the weight pressing downward. Yet none knelt. Their defiance was instinct, bred by oath and duty, but their bodies broke beneath the strain. The trooper who had touched the crown convulsed on the floor, whispering in tongues not his own. His eyes rolled white, his body jerking as if puppet two strings unseen. His voice deepened, layered with tones, alien and cold. Through cracked lips, the words formed, chilling the air. This is not yours. This was never yours. The squad recoiled, weapons raised, but Corda held them fast. The possession ended as quickly as it began, the soldier collapsing into silence, his body still alive, but how? The crown did not dim. It shimmered brighter, victorious in rejection. Corda tore his gaze away, forcing himself to signal retreat. His men stumbled from the chamber, dragging their broken comrade with them, the hum following in their bones long after the artifact was out of sight. Behind them, the crown waited, eternal, sovereign. Radiant it would never bow to flesh. The corridor that followed the crown was narrow, almost claustrophobic. Its walls pressed close, as though the tomb itself sought to funnel the squad into inevitability. Their lumen beams traced the alloy surfaces, each polished smooth, as if untouched by age. At first, the only sound was the measured rhythm of boots, striking metal step after step, disciplined, precise. But then came the echoes. Not ordinary echoes. The sound did not return as repetition. It returned altered. When Sergeant Corda's boot fell, the answering noise arrived a fraction too soon. Striking the walls before his foot had touched the ground, Varric's stride sounded heavier in reflection than it did in truth, each step carrying the weight of armor he did not wear. Jaren faltered when his own echo came late, lagging as though the corridor corrected his rhythm with disdain. The soldiers slowed instinctively, their discipline cracking under the uncanny mimicry. But the corridor did not stop. It adapted. The hum deepened, low vibrations rising from beneath the alloy floor. It was not sound in air, but sound in marrow, the kind that rattled teeth and made lungs stutter. Their footfalls no longer belonged to them. The corridor anticipated, filling the silence of the next step before it was taken, humming their rhythm in advance, as if it knew the sequence better than they did. Private Jaren swore aloud, panic raw in his vox. It's inside my stride. It's marching me. Corda silenced him with a harsh order, but his own chest tightened with the same truth. Each pace felt less like motion chosen and more like ritual observed. The corridor guiding their bodies into steps they no longer commanded. The walls themselves began to vibrate. Subtle at first, then more pronounced. Their lumen beams revealed, faint lines rippling along the surface, like muscle contracting beneath skin. With every step, the walls tightened slightly, closing inward, then loosening again, as though the passage itself inhaled their rhythm. The squad pressed forward, faster now, their nerves fraying under the pressure, but speed only worsened the pattern. The corridor adjusted, humming quicker, predicting faster, swallowing each new rhythm with precision that left no room for error. One trooper broke into a run, his panic carrying him ahead of the formation. For a heartbeat, the corridor answered with a thunder of rushing footsteps, amplifying his sprint into a storm of sound that drowned out the others. Then it silenced him. His boot struck alloy once more, but no echo followed. The absence was louder than any noise, a suffocating void that swallowed his stride. He froze, paralyzed by the nothing that awaited each footfall. When the squad reached him, he was trembling, muttering that he could no longer hear himself, that the corridor had stolen the sound of his steps. Corda forced him back into line, his commands clipped and cold, though his voice cracked with strain. The squad resumed their march, but now each man doubted the sound of his own motion. Was it theirs? Was it the corridor's prediction? Did their feet even touch the ground, or were they carried along a path already known? Varric tried to fight it, deliberately staggering his pace, pausing, skipping steps. The corridor adapted instantly, anticipating each hesitation, feeding the altered rhythm back to him before he acted. His laughter crackled through the vox, manic and broken. It knows me. It knows me better than I do. Corda struck him across the chest with a gauntlet hand, snapping him back to formation. But the damage was done. The corridor had proven its dominance. Further in, the sound evolved. No longer just footfalls, but whispers threaded between them. The echoes of steps bled into syllables, faint words carried in tones too low to decipher. They were not human. They were not prayer. They were instruction. Every man heard a different sequence, commands in alien tongues spoken at the pace of his stride. The corridor was not only learning their movement, it was teaching them one of its own. The squad's breaths grew ragged, their lungs straining against the rhythm forced upon them. Their hearts began to match the corridor's hum, pumping in unnatural sync. The realization struck Corda with cold finality. This was not passage. This was integration. The tomb did not want them as explorers. It wanted them as participants. At last, the corridor widened, opening into shadow that stretched into another chamber. The hum fell silent the moment they crossed the threshold, leaving their ears ringing with the absence. They stumbled, unsteady, their bodies still trying to match a rhythm no longer given. Behind them, the passage lay quiet, patient, as if nothing had ever stirred within its walls. Yet the soldiers carried its lessons still. Their steps no longer belonged fully to themselves. Each footfall felt borrowed, as though the ground anticipated and allowed it only by choice. The corridor had learned them, and it would never forget. The chamber opened in silence, so complete it felt sacrilegious to breathe. At first glance, its walls seemed bare smooth alloy, unbroken by glyph or mark. The patrol advanced cautiously, lumen beams sweeping across emptiness that revealed nothing, their boots scraping softly against the floor. It should have been a relief after corridors that hummed, after halls that anticipated their steps. But emptiness itself is rarely honest. Trooper Varric was the first to notice. His gaze lingered too long on a stretch of wall, his visor catching faint shimmer where there should have been none. He tilted his head, narrowing his eyes, and then he froze. Letters burned into existence across the surface, not seared by fire, but igniting with light, script alive in motion. They were not static carvings, but fluid marks, shifting faster than comprehension, rearranging into forms his mind could not hold. His breath hitched, his vox cracking. "It's writing me." The others turned their beams toward him, and as they stared, the walls betrayed them too. From blank alloy, scripts flared, lines twisting into characters that seemed to breathe. They carried the structure of language, yet no man could name its origin. Harsh angular strokes flowed into sweeping arcs, symbols folding and unfolding in rhythm that suggested both record and erasure. And as they looked, each man felt a hollowness spread inside him, subtle at first, then undeniable. Private Jaren dropped to his knees, clawing at his breastplate. "It's taking me." His voice broke into static. "I can't." His words dissolved, mid-syllable, as though the vox itself had forgotten the sounds he tried to make. Corda yanked him back, forcing his gaze down, but the damage was done. The private's name faltered on every tongue. The men tried to recall it, to say it aloud, but only fragments came, syllables twisted into alien cadence. What had been Jaren thinned in their memory, replaced by tones that did not belong to mankind. Panic rippled through the squad. One trooper muttered his own name over and over like prayer, clinging to syllables that trembled on his lips. But the wall betrayed him too. Its script blazed brighter, rearranging into forms that mirrored his voice. With every repetition, the name weakened, thinning like smoke in wind. Soon, the syllables slurred, shifting into something sharper, colder, His eyes went wide as he realized he had spoken it for the last time. The chamber thrummed with invisible resonance, a pulse that pressed into skulls like unseen fingers. The writing grew faster, burning brighter until the walls blazed with constant flux. No name survived its scrutiny. Each man felt syllables unravel in his own mind, stripped of shape, replaced by alien syllables that settled heavy on the tongue. They were not given choice. The chamber wrote over them. Sergeant Corda fought hardest. His voice roared through the vox. His name barked in rhythm with each step, defiance hammered into syllables. But even his command could not withstand it. The walls answered in kind, blazing his name in alien script, tearing it down letter by letter, syllable by syllable. He staggered, clutching his helmet, his breath ragged. When he tried again, the word that left his mouth was no longer his. It was harder, harsher, metallic in tone. His men stared in horror, recognizing him only by his stance, no longer by the sound of his name. Varric pressed against the wall, desperation overcoming fear. His gauntlet struck alloy, but the surface did not yield. The script only flared brighter, twisting faster, searing into his visor's lenses until his vision blurred. He staggered back, choking on alien syllables that forced themselves into his throat. Syllables that did not belong to him but demanded to be spoken. The chamber was not archive, it was theft. It did not preserve names, it consumed them, stripping them of human syllable, remaking them in tongue of rulers long buried. One soldier collapsed outright, his body spasming as if his identity itself had been torn free. His comrades dragged him up, but he was silent, his lips moving without sound, his eyes blank with loss. Whatever name he bore had been erased so cleanly that memory itself refused to hold it. He had become nothing but weight in their hands, body without title, comrade without recall. Corda gathered what discipline remained, dragging his men toward the far archway. His voice rasped alien syllables when he gave the command, but his body spoke authority they still recognized. Step by step, they staggered from the chamber, refusing to look back. At the threshold, Varric risked a glance. The walls were blank once more, smooth alloy, reflecting nothing. No glyphs, no script, no blazing flux, as if none of it had ever existed. Yet, when he tried to whisper his own name, nothing came, only alien syllables, jagged and cold. He realized then that the chamber had not shown them writing, it had written them, and the names they had carried in were gone. The chamber greeted them not with echoes, nor shifting script, but with stillness so total it pressed like stone against their ears. Their own breathing rasped too loud, every exhale unnatural in the vast quiet. At the center stood a dais of black alloy, its surface polished into mere sheen. Upon it rested a weapon. The blade was long, elegant in proportion, and impossibly pristine. Its edge gleamed with light that did not belong to the lumen beams, but with something older, something inherent. No rust marked it, no tarnish dulled it, no dust had dared settle upon it. It was as though the weapon existed outside decay, untouched by time's cruelty. Even the air around it seemed thinner, strained beneath its presence. The squad drew near, weapons raised more out of instinct than intent. Sergeant Corda halted them with a raised fist, his visor tilted toward the blade, his gauntlet flexing against his rifle. The silence deepened, pulsing faintly, as though the chamber itself deferred to the weapon on the dais. Trooper Varric whispered through his vox, voice breaking, "It's waiting for a hand." The words seemed blasphemous, yet none dared contradict them, because all of them felt it. The blade did not rest. It anticipated. One soldier moved before Corda could stop him. Desperation or compulsion drove him, but his boots carried him across the floor until he stood at the dais. He hesitated only a heartbeat before reaching out. His gauntlet closed around the hilt, and for an instant, nothing happened. Then silence broke, or rather, it was consumed. The rasp of breath, the faint creak of armor, the whine of lumen paxil ceased, torn away as though erased. The blade lifted, gleaming, and sound itself was devoured. When the soldier swung it experimentally through the air, there was no whisper of motion, no scrape, no displaced breath. The weapon did not cut air, it annihilated it. The squad recoiled, their own breathing returning in ragged gasps only once the swing ended. The soldier holding it trembled, his visor fogging with condensation, his vox clicking open without sound. His lips moved, but no voice carried. His words had been severed. Corda advanced cautiously, his gauntlet raised in warning. "Drop it," he ordered. His own voice cracked with strain, yet still, it carried. The soldier turned toward him, the blade gleaming faintly in his grasp. Corda felt the silence press against him like a predator's breath, the absence heavier than noise. The soldier staggered forward, lifting the weapon again. The squad raised rifles, but none dared fire. Every man felt the same certainty. No shot would matter against something that devoured sound itself. The blade came down in an arc, and though it never touched stone, the floor shuddered beneath their boots. A line scored across alloy, not burned, not shattered, but erased. Matter itself seemed to have been convinced it no longer existed. The wielder's body convulsed, vox sparking faint static as if struggling to bridge silence. His knees buckled, and still he clung to the hilt. Corda surged forward, ripping the weapon from his grasp. For an instant, the silence consumed him too, severing his voice, stilling his breath. The weapon pulsed in his gauntlet, hungry, radiant, terrible. He hurled it back onto the dais, where it landed without sound. The chamber inhaled. Noise returned in a rush, the ragged gasps of his men, the scrape of boots, the hiss of fear breaking from tight throats. The soldier who had first lifted it lay sprawled, chest heaving, eyes wide with terror. He tried to speak, but his voice was gone. The blade had devoured it, severed his sound as surely as any cut of flesh. He would never speak again. The men dragged him back, their eyes never leaving the dais. The blade gleamed still, untouched, unweakened, waiting. Varric muttered, half prayer, half curse. "That's not a weapon. That's a verdict." Corda forced them onward, though his gaze lingered on the artifact longer than he intended. Its edge seemed brighter now, as though it remembered his grip. The silence of its presence clung to him, a reminder that some weapons were never meant for men of flesh, that their purpose was not conquest, but erasure. As they left the chamber, the air behind them fell quiet once more. Not natural quiet, not rest. The silence of a blade that had tasted hands unworthy, and waited for those who would not bleed. The chamber beyond carried weight before they even entered it. Not the weight of silence, nor of memory, but of pressure like the breath of a storm swelling in lungs too vast to see. The patrol's lumen beams carved pale cones across the dark, sweeping over row upon row of sarcophagi, these ones larger than those they had left behind. They stood upright against the walls, towering slabs of black stone framed in alloy, lids carved with geometric precision that made human funerary rites seem crude. For a time, they seemed dormant. Dust cloaked their edges, settled thick along the floor in layers undisturbed by millennia. The squad moved cautiously between them, their boots sinking softly into the powder. Every step stirred clouds that curled like smoke, drifting upward before fading into nothing. Sergeant Corda kept his rifle trained forward, every muscle taut. His men followed, nerves stretched thin by chambers that had consumed their names, their steps, their voices. Here, they expected only silence, but silence did not endure. The first sound was faint, too subtle for certainty, a low grind like stone dragged against stone, far in the distance. The squad froze, helmets turning as one. The grind returned, louder this time, closer, accompanied by the faint fall of dust from the ceiling. A lid shifted, not forward, not outward, but upward. The massive stone slab rose, seamless, defying its own weight. No crack splintered, no hinge groaned. It lifted as if pulled by hands unseen. The soldiers raised weapons, their beams locking onto the sarcophagus as dust poured from its seams. From within came a figure, tall and skeletal, forged of metal, darker than iron. Its surface etched with lines that pulsed faintly green. Its eyes burned to life, two coals set deep in sockets of alloy. It did not breathe. It did not stagger. It stepped forward with inevitability. The chamber erupted. Sarcophagus after sarcophagus began to stir, lids rising in unison. Dust cascaded in torrents, choking the air, veiling the squad in storms of powder. Through it, more figures emerged, each identical in shape, but varied in detail, some bearing blades of segmented metal that crackled with emerald fire, others clutching rifles whose barrels glowed with sickly light. Their movements were slow, not hesitant but deliberate, as though each step was the continuation of a march that had never ceased. Private Varric's voice broke into static across the Vox. "Emperor, protect us. They're walking." His words splintered into panic as more and more forms emerged, the chamber alive now with the rhythm of rising stone. The sound grew deafening, not chaotic but ordered, a cadence of inevitability. The first warrior advanced, its weapon raised with motion too smooth to belong to any machine. Its gaze locked upon the squad, but there was no malice, no anger, only the cold certainty of recognition. The lasguns fired in frantic bursts, bolts of red light lancing through dust. Impacts struck alloy, some glancing, some striking true. None left mark. The figures walked through the fire, unbroken, undisturbed, their pace unchanged. One trooper screamed as a green bolt lanced from the rifle of a newly risen warrior. It struck him square in the chest, his armor bubbling, warping, dissolving into molten slag. His body convulsed, collapsing into ash and ruin before the squad could pull him back. The green light lingered in their vision, seared into retinas, a promise of annihilation. Corda roared for retreat, his voice cracking against the static of fear. The squad staggered backward, firing blindly, their discipline shattered. Yet for every step they took, the warriors advanced one, in perfect unison. Their formation was flawless, their patience absolute. They did not rush. They did not falter. They simply moved, mechanical and eternal, as though this moment had been rehearsed 1,000 times across 1,000 worlds. The sarcophagi continued to rise. Dozens, hundreds, dust cascaded, like sand through a broken hourglass, veiling the chamber in pale storm. The soldiers could barely see each other, their visors fogged with static and sweat. Through it, only the glow of emerald eyes burned clear, countless and closing. Varric stumbled, nearly swallowed by the tide, before Corda hauled him upright. The sergeant's visor caught the nearest warrior in full, its skeletal face illuminated by green fire. For a heartbeat, Corda saw not enemy, not machine, but inevitability itself, a figure that had marched before mankind's first hive was raised, and would march long after his bones turned to dust. He felt it in his marrow. This was not war. It was reclamation. The squad fought toward the archway at the far end, their weapons spitting red fury into the storm. But each shot felt smaller, weaker, against the weight of eternity pressing forward. The chamber shook with the rhythm of steps too old to be stopped. Sarcophagi still opened behind, dust still poured, more and more figures rising into the march. When they stumbled through the threshold, lungs burning, eyes blind from static, Corda turned back once. The chamber was a sea of green eyes now, endless rows of warriors advancing with perfect unity. The lids of sarcophagi still lifted, more waiting to join. He knew then that the tomb had never been still, never abandoned. It had simply been waiting for the moment to walk again. The corridor beyond the walking tomb was narrow, but no safer. The men staggered through it, lungs burning, ears still ringing with the silent rhythm of mechanical steps. They expected pursuit, the emerald glow of weapons in the dark. Instead, they found something worse. Words without sound. The first syllables struck without warning. It was not heard. It was placed. A single tone entered their skulls with the weight of a hammer. rattling bone and thought alike. Trooper Varric cried out, clutching his helmet, but his vox carried only static. His scream had no sound, yet his agony was undeniable. Another syllable followed, then another, each striking like a drumbeat of command. They did not form language, not as the Imperium understood it, but neither were they noise. They carried intent, authority, certainty so complete it brooked no defiance. The explorers did not listen. They endured. Sergeant Corda staggered forward. His gauntlet pressed hard against his visor, as though to block the intrusion. His voice cracked across the vox, words dragged from his throat like chains. It's not talking, it's installing, and the truth of it pressed on them all. This was not dialogue. It was restructuring. Each syllable carved thought, reshaping conviction, pressing alien certainty into human marrow. Private Jaren collapsed outright, his body convulsing as though struck by shockmaul. His lips moved soundlessly, syllables shaping in air, though his throat carried no voice. The others dragged him upright, but his eyes were wrong-glazed, reflective, as though staring at constellations unseen. Through the vox, his broken voice crackled, layered with tones not his own. You are not yours. You were never yours. The chamber around them thrummed with resonance. No speaker stood in sight. No machine or figure loomed. The words did not need mouths. They arrived whole, imposed directly upon skull and soul. Some syllables carried the cold clarity of command. Others were heavier, crushing, like judgments passed in tongues, too vast for comprehension. Each word carried weight enough to alter thought. To press obedience into bone, the squad fired their rifles in blind desperation, lost bolts cutting into walls and dark alike. The chamber did not answer with violence. It did not need to. The voice continued, each syllable heavier than the last, reshaping their fear into something sharper. Varric gasped through static, his voice trembling. It knows me. It's changing me. One trooper dropped his rifle altogether, falling to his knees. His gauntlets pressed against the alloy floor, his helmet bowed. Not in surrender's posture was too rigid for that, but in compliance. His lips moved in rhythm with the unseen words, speaking syllables, not human. When Corda tried to drag him upright, the soldier resisted, his strength doubled by conviction not his own. His vox crackled with tones alien and cold. Orders are eternal. The others pulled him back, but the damage was clear. He no longer belonged fully to them. The squad pressed forward, dragging their broken with them, yet the voice grew louder, deeper. Each syllable landed not only in skull, but in chest, compressing lungs, staggering hearts. The rhythm quickened, syllables spilling like litany, until every man heard not command, but scripture. They were not being spoken to. They were being indoctrinated. Corda roared through the vox, forcing his voice to break the rhythm. Ignore it. Keep moving. His words shook, but they carried weight enough to pull his men forward. One foot after another, they staggered toward the far end, their breath ragged, their thoughts no longer entirely their own. The final syllables struck hardest. Not command, not judgment, recognition. They carried a certainty that settled into bone, whispering what the squad already feared, that their resistance was irrelevant, that their oaths and prayers meant nothing, that they were already known. Known, weighed, recorded, claimed. At last they stumbled through the far archway. The resonance lessened, the syllables fading, leaving only the echo of what had been planted. Their ears rang, but their skulls still hummed with fragments of alien tongue. Jaren staggered to his feet, visor cracked, voice trembling through the vox. He tried to speak his own name, but what emerged were syllables, sharp and metallic. The residue of command still lodged in his throat. His comrades recoiled, realizing he had been altered at the root. Behind them, the chamber pulsed once more, patient, confident. It did not need to follow. The words had already been spoken. The voice had no mouth, because it required none. What it commanded would endure. The next chamber opened vast, its scale dwarfing every hall before it. The squad entered cautiously, lumen beams cutting through layers of dust suspended like fog. At first, the space seemed empty, just an expanse of alloy floor, vanishing into shadow. Then the light caught movement, not quick, not hostile. Deliberate dot figures emerged from the haze, tall and skeletal, armored in alloys that shimmered like stone polished to glass. Their forms gleamed faintly with energy that no forge of mankind could ever replicate. Their weapons were immense and alien, crackling faintly with power that bled light across the chamber. Each warrior's movements were precise, coordinated, without the waste of a single motion. The squad froze, rifles rising instinctively. But no attack came. The figures advanced, not toward them, but toward one another. Their ranks spread across the chamber, dividing cleanly into two formations. One side bore long, staff-like weapons crowned with blades that pulsed with green fire. The other carried rifles whose barrels burned with smoldering energy. In silence, they raised their arms, and the battle began. Yet no clash struck flesh, no blade tore armor, no rifle discharged. The warriors moved with perfection. Each strike halted an instant before impact. Each shot never fired. It was not hesitation. It was repetition. The choreography of a war that had already been fought. Private Varric whispered through the vox, voice cracking. "They're not fighting us. They're fighting each other." His words hung heavy, for it was clear to all. This was no reenactment. This was not memory replay. This was a battle locked in time, refusing to end. The figures advanced and retreated. Strikes meeting in silence, formations shifting with mathematical precision. When one fell, it did not collapse. It froze mid-motion, body locked in tableau, then rose again to rejoin the pattern. The war did not consume them. It preserved them. Each moment of triumph and loss repeated endlessly, ageless, without conclusion. The squad tried to skirt the edge of the chamber, weapons ready, hearts pounding, but the formations shifted toward them, lines bending in ways that suggested inevitability, not attack, not acknowledgement, simply the continuation of the sequence. The men found themselves moving through the midst of a war that had no beginning and no end. Private Jaren staggered when a blade swept past his helmet, halting a finger's breadth from contact. The energy of it scorched his filters, searing the air, but the figure froze, locked in a moment that never resolved. Jaren gasped, voice breaking into static. "It saw me. It knew I'd be here." And that was the truth that curdled their stomachs. The battle was not playing out blindly. It adjusted to them, weaving their presence into the choreography as if they had always been there. Every step they took was anticipated, folded into the endless war as though the sequence had known them before they entered. Sergeant Corda forced his men forward, his voice strained but steady. "Keep moving. Don't engage." But even he felt the weight of inevitability pressing down. His boots struck ground in rhythm not his own. His path felt rehearsed, dictated by a battle that had already consumed his presence before he arrived. As they pushed deeper, the war intensified. The figures moved faster, their motions blurring into arcs of light and shadow. Weapons cut air that trembled under their passage, rifles raised and lowered with mechanical grace. The squad ducked and staggered, weaving between strikes that never landed, bolts that never fired, yet the tension gnawed at them all. What if, just once, a blow did not stop? What if the pattern finally demanded resolution? One trooper broke. He fired his lasgun point-blank into the chest of a skeletal warrior locked mid. The bolt flared and vanished. The figure did not fall. It did not react. It simply resumed its motion, unbroken, as if the attack had never occurred. Worse, the soldier's own echo returned not sound, but sight. For a heartbeat, he saw himself within the formation, his stance mirrored by the warriors, his weapon gleaming with green light instead of red. He screamed and fled toward the squad, but his voice carried syllables, not his own. Corda dragged him back into line, forcing his eyes forward. His own visor reflected the endless choreography, the same battle replayed without loss, without end. He realized then that this was not war as humans knew it. War consumed, war destroyed. This was different. This was preservation. The memory of conflict held in perfect suspension, refusing to decay. The squad staggered toward the far archway, lungs burning, minds frayed. Around them, the warriors continued their ageless struggle, formations shifting with inhuman precision. No side gained ground, no victory came, no defeat ended the sequence. At the threshold, Varric dared one last glance back. The battle had already closed the gap they left behind. Formations sealing as though their presence had been a note in music now played out. The figures moved without pause, eternal, inevitable. He whispered, broken, into the vox. It never ended. It never will. And the war raged on, untouched by time, unyielding to death. Preserved in endless repetition, the air grew heavier as they pressed forward, the echoes of the ageless battle fading behind them but not leaving their bones. The corridor narrowed once more, funneling them toward a sound that rose slowly, steadily, until it filled their skulls. At first it seemed like machinery, dull thuds reverberating through alloy, vibrations humming up from the floor into their boots. But soon it became unmistakable. This was no machine's rhythm. It was a heartbeat. The chamber opened into vastness, but the space felt closer than any before. The walls curved inward, alloy striated with veins of dull green light, pulsing in time with the sound. Engines lined the floor and ceiling, massive constructs of interlocked gears and conduits, yet none turned. They expanded and contracted instead, their surfaces rippling like muscle beneath skin. Breath caught in throats as realization struck the tomb itself was inhaling. Trooper Varric staggered forward, visor tilted toward the massive engines. "It's alive," he rasped, though the word felt inadequate. Sergeant Corda corrected him, voice strained. Not alive, dreaming, because that was the truth that pressed down upon them. The rhythm was not steady. It stuttered, faltered, surged, not mechanical, but restless. The squad advanced cautiously, their weapons raised, though useless against a chamber that itself seemed to breathe. Each pulse shook the floor, rattling armor and loosening dust from the ceiling. The air carried warmth now, faint but undeniable, as though blood should have flowed in the conduits, if only the machine still possessed it. Private Jaren choked back a sob, his vox trembling. "It remembers. Emperor help us, it remembers what it was." The men froze as one of the engines convulsed violently. Its surface warped, bulging outward before settling back into rhythm. For an instant, its shape was wrong. Not a machine, not alloy, but something organic. Rib-like arcs, sinews stretched across them, a hollow cavity where lungs should have drawn breath. Then it collapsed again, into seamless alloy, as though ashamed of what it had revealed. Every soldier felt the same truth carve into him. The tomb had once known flesh. It had once carried blood, muscle, hunger, decay. But it had rejected those burdens, choosing alloy and eternity instead. Yet the heartbeat proved the rejection incomplete. Some fragment remained, dormant, gnawing, dreaming. The sound deepened, rolling through their chests until their own pulses faltered, trying to match. Corda roared for them to hold formation, but his own breath betrayed him, falling in rhythm with the chamber. Their lungs obeyed its cycle, their hearts strained against its command. They were not walking through a machine. They were walking through an anatomy long buried but never forgotten. One trooper collapsed, clutching his chest. His armor shook with each convulsion, his ribs rising and falling in perfect sync with the engines. His scream burst through the vox, muffled by ragged breath. "It's inside mids, using me." His eyes rolled back, his body trembling in seizure. The others dragged him back, but the pulse did not release him. Only when Corda fired a lost bolt into the ceiling, splitting the rhythm with raw noise, did the trooper gasp back into himself. Even then, his breathing carried the ghost of the chamber's cycle. The engines continued their restless dream, shifting shape in subtle ways. Some bulged outward like swollen organs, others contracted like dying lungs. Shadows on the walls twisted into forms of flesh, outlines of bodies that flickered in and out of being. The tomb was remembering itself in fragments, glimpses of muscle, of sinew, of the form it had abandoned, but not fully. Never fully, Varric muttered through the vox, words brittle. It wants it back. It wants the blood. The chambers seemed to answer with a surge in rhythm, the pulse quickening until the walls shuddered. For an instant, the squad felt the crushing weight of hunger press down upon them, not their own, but the tomb's. Hunger for what it had lost. The squad pushed onward, stumbling beneath the rhythm. Their boots struck floor that quivered like flesh. Alloy softened to elasticity before hardening again. Every surface seemed to test them, to taste them. By the time they reached the far archway, their lungs burned, their hearts staggered, their bodies exhausted not by exertion, but by the effort of resisting integration. At the threshold, Corda turned back once. The chambers still pulsed, but slower now, settling into uneasy rhythm. For a moment, the vast engines seemed almost still, almost restful, but he knew better. Dreams never stayed quiet. They built, they swelled, they demanded waking. The tomb had chosen eternity, yet it still dreamed of flesh, and one day, that dream would wake. The corridors sloped downward into suffocating dark, as though the tomb itself meant to bury them alive. The air grew colder with each step, their breaths condensing against visors, leaving frost along filters. At last the passage widened, spilling them into a chamber so vast, it seemed to swallow the lumen beams whole. What the light finally revealed was worse than shadow. The walls were lined with bones, not stacked in careless piles, nor arranged as graves. Each skeleton stood upright, locked in position against the alloy walls. Their frames fused into place as if entombed in ritual display. The remains stretched from floor to ceiling, countless rows upon rows, their hollow sockets staring into the void. At first, the soldiers recoiled from sheer number, but then their beams traced the surfaces more closely, and horror deepened. Every bone was carved. Femurs, ribs, skulls, every inch etched with fine incisions. At first they looked like glyphs, alien script seared into calcium, but the longer the squad stared, the more the patterns coalesced into familiarity. They were not words. They were stars, coordinates, systems, entire constellations etched into bone. Trooper Varric staggered forward, his visor sweeping across a ribcage where hundreds of lines intersected, each point marked with alien precision. He raised a trembling hand, voice raw through the vox. "It's a map," Sergeant Corda corrected him, though his tone carried no comfort. "Not a map, a record." The squad fanned out cautiously, weapons trembling in their gauntlets. Every direction revealed more bone, more engravings. The scale was incomprehensible. Each skeleton bore fragments of coordinates, but together they stretched into a lattice that filled the chamber. A network of stars so vast, no human chart could contain it. Their lumen beams picked out systems they almost recognized, shapes, echoing constellations seen by Imperial navigators, yet wrong, altered, incomplete. The realization struck slowly, but relentlessly. These were not stars of the past. They were not histories of conquest already won. They were invasions yet to come. The soldiers froze, the weight of inevitability pressing into their skulls. Private Jaren's voice cracked through the vox, trembling. "It's prophecy. They carved the galaxy before they ever walked it." His words broke, strangled by fear. "And they're not finished. because the carvings did not end neatly. Entire stretches of bone bore half-completed constellations. Systems unmarked, spaces left blank, as if waiting for the next campaign. The map was not static. It was work in progress, built upon skeletons that had once belonged to something human, or something that had been made human only to be used as parchment. The squad's steps grew cautious, reverent in dread. Every crunch of boot against bone fragments scattered on the floor echoed like blasphemy. Varric swore. He felt the sockets of the skeletons tilt toward him, as though their hollow eyes still remembered the agony of being inscribed. The chamber reeked faintly of iron, though the bones themselves were dry, stripped of all life long before Terra knew fire. Corda forced his men onward, but even he faltered as his gaze locked on a skull directly ahead. The cranium was etched so deeply the bone had cracked, yet the fissures had been repaired with thin veins of alloy, fusing the fragments into permanence. Across its dome stretched a cluster of stars that glowed faintly with residual energy, as if the coordinates themselves had been burned into memory, not of bone, but of reality. His chest tightened with the certainty. This was not map-making. This was intent. One trooper collapsed to his knees, hands trembling as he traced the etchings on a femur. His vox crackled with a voice not his own, syllables in alien tongue spilling like blood. He gasped between words, his own name breaking apart as he whispered coordinates none of the others could comprehend. Corda tore him back, dragging him to his feet, but the damage lingered. The trooper's eyes were glazed, reflecting stars that were not visible to any human sky. The chamber pressed in heavier the deeper they walked, as though the sheer number of coordinates exerted weight, their helmets fogged with condensation, skulls aching with the strain of trying to comprehend patterns older and larger than any mortal mind could contain. The truth became undeniable. This was not art, it was strategy. An invasion mapped not on parchment, not on chart, but on the marrow of those who had been conquered. Private Jaren sobbed openly through his vox, voice broken. They've already written us. They've already carved where we'll fall. His words echoed, unchallenged. None could deny the thought that their own bones might one day line these walls, their skeletons engraved with stars yet to be claimed. At the far end of the chamber stood a single colossal skeleton, fused into the alloy floor. Its bones were not human. The ribcage spanned wider than a land raider, the skull elongated, jaws lined with teeth too sharp, too ordered. Every inch of its titanic frame was etched with constellations, coordinates sprawling across it like scripture. At its sternum burned a single point of green fire, faint but constant. Corda felt his knees weaken, but he did not kneel. His voice rasped through the vox, steadier than his lungs. This isn't prophecy, it's schedule. The chamber exhaled dust, as if in agreement, fine particles falling from unseen heights, coating their armor like ash. The squad backed toward the next passage, their eyes locked on the vast skeleton, that burning point of green marking a system none of them recognized, yet they all knew the meaning. It had not been taken yet, but it would be. The chamber widened into immensity, dwarfing every passage and hall they had crossed. Their lumen beams faltered against its scale, swallowed by distance, until the glow struck something vast at its center. A throne, not carved from stone, nor forged by human hand, but shaped from alloy, so seamless it defied recognition as craft. It rose higher than any cathedral's altar, its back curving into shadow, its arms wide enough to cradle tanks. It was not ornamented. It did not need to be. Its presence alone commanded the void. The squad froze as one. No order was given. None was needed. Their knees buckled, their spines bent, their heads lowered before thought could intervene. It was not choice. It was gravity. The throne did not inspire reverence, it demanded it. Their bodies understood this before their minds could resist. Sergeant Corda forced himself upright, muscles trembling, his gauntlet digging into his thigh as he fought the compulsion. His vox cracked with strain, words dragged from clenched teeth. "Stand on your feet." His men obeyed only partially, rising half an inch before their armor seemed to weigh double, dragging them back down. Each attempt to resist carried pain not in muscle or bone, but in thought, as though defiance itself was taxed. The throne loomed silent, vast, eternal, empty, yet its vacancy was more terrifying than occupancy. It was not a relic abandoned, it was a seat awaiting return. Every soldier felt it, deep in marrow. This was not a throne forgotten. It was a throne reserved. Varric whispered through the vox, his voice shaking. "If it's empty, then the king still lives." The words struck the chamber like blasphemy, but no answer came. Only the weight grew heavier. Pressing their bodies closer to alloy floor, the surface of the throne shimmered faintly. Lines of green light coursing across its arms, subtle as veins beneath skin. The squad's visors blurred, their eyes watering as the glow pulsed in rhythm, not with their own hearts, but with something greater. A heartbeat that was not present, yet lingered, as if the throne remembered the body that once occupied it. Private Jaren collapsed fully, his gauntlets scraping against the floor as he pressed his head to alloy. His vox carried broken syllables, not Gothic but alien, spilling in cadence like prayer. He was not worshipping, he was reciting. The throne had filled him with words, not his own. Corda dragged him up, shaking him violently. The private's eyes reflected green glow, his mouth still moving in silent litany. Corda turned his visor back to the throne, fury laced with fear. His vox roared, defiance forced through clenched jaw. "We do not bow, not here, not to this." The chamber answered with pressure. Every joint in their armor groaned, every skull rang with weight. Yet still the throne remained empty, patient, waiting. Its demand was not for worship, it was for inevitability. The squad felt it as certainty. One day, a figure would sit here again, and when that day came, no cathedral, no fortress, no world would refuse its dominion. The men struggled forward, inch by inch, each step tearing at muscle, as though the floor clung to their limbs. The nearer they drew, the heavier the compulsion grew. By the time they reached the base of the dais, most could not rise at all. They crawled across alloy like penitents, dragged down by reverence that was not theirs. Varric lifted his head just enough to see the throne clearly. His breath caught. The seat was not empty, not fully. Upon its surface lay an imprint, faint but undeniable curves where shoulders had rested, indentations where hands had once gripped the arms. The throne remembered its occupant, in shape as much as in pulse. Varric's voice broke through static. It was filled. It was filled. The squad recoiled instinctively, even Corda, faltering at the sight. The indentations had not aged, had not faded. They were fresh, recent, as though the occupant had only just risen. The throne pulsed once more, veins of green flaring, and every soldier collapsed. Their visors struck alloy, their bodies refusing motion. The compulsion pressed them flat, pinning them as insects beneath a giant's hand. It lasted a single heartbeat, then lifted, leaving them gasping, broken, sprawled across the floor like corpses. When at last they staggered back to their feet, none spoke, none dared. The silence of the throne was heavier than any voice. They retreated step by step, backs bent, unable to turn away until the shadows swallowed the vast seat hole. Only when the archway closed behind them did Corda rasp through his vox. His voice cracked and hollow. "Empty doesn't mean gone." And the throne waited still. The tremor came first, subtle, at the edges of perception, like the faint roll of distant artillery. The squad froze as one, weapons raised, visors scanning the shadowed corridor. Then the vibration deepened, pulsing through alloy, rattling their teeth, shaking dust loose from ceilings that had endured millennia untouched. Sand poured in rivulets down the walls, spilling from cracks above, cascading like hourglass grains. The tomb was shifting. Sergeant Corda barked orders for formation, but his voice cracked against the vox, drowned by the growing roar. The floor beneath their boots quivered like the skin of some vast beast turning in its sleep. Yet, even as panic clawed their throats, a deeper realization pressed into their minds. This was no sleep. It had never been sleep. The sarcophagi they had passed before shuddered in memory. The warriors that had walked without haste. The voice that had spoken without mouth. The throne that had demanded without occupant. None of these had belonged to a tomb abandoned. They had belonged to a tomb timed, a machine of inevitability, set to wake not from rest but from patience. And the hour had come. The corridor cracked open, fractures running along its walls, as though the alloy itself sought release. Dust poured thicker, choking their filters, coating their armor in pale shroud. From beyond, the sound of stone grinding against stone rolled like thunder. The squad staggered, some dropping to one knee under the sheer weight of vibration. Above, dunes collapsed inward, pouring through fissures, burying the chamber in rivers of sand. Figures emerged from the dark, rising not with the hesitation of sleepers, but with the precision of soldiers answering a signal. Their forms gleamed with the same impossible alloy, their eyes igniting an emerald glow, their weapons already in hand. They had not been caught unaware. They had not been disturbed. They had been waiting. Private Varric's voice cracked into static. Emperor Protect Uste knew. His words carried more despair than prayer, because even as the squad raised rifles, even as Law's bolts cracked against advancing forms, the truth rang through their marrow. This was not awakening. It was resumption, a continuation of a march paused, not ended. The chamber shook harder. Entire walls collapsed outward, revealing ranks upon ranks of figures rising in unison. Their weapons thrummed with energy, their movements impossibly synchronized. They did not rush. They did not falter. They emerged with the calm certainty of inevitability. Corda forced his men into retreat, barking orders sharp enough to cut through fear. They fell back toward the next archway, firing as they moved, Low's bolts carving streaks of red into the storm of dust. Some strikes hit, flashing against armor, but none slowed the advance. The figures marched with the indifference of machines, but the patience of Kings. One trooper broke formation, stumbling into the center of the corridor as the floor split beneath him. He screamed as the ground collapsed, dropping him into the black below. For a heartbeat, his cries echoed, then silence swallowed him. The fissure sealed with groan of alloy, erasing all trace of his fall. The tomb consumed without pause, as though reclaiming what had always been its own. The squad pressed harder, lungs burning, hearts pounding. The sand poured thicker, filling the chamber in tides that slowed their flight. Every step became struggle, every breath a curse. Through the veil of dust, the emerald eyes closed in endless, patient, unyielding. Varric stumbled, dragged forward by two comrades, his visor cracked, his voice breaking. They were never buried, never gone, just waiting for the signal. His words dissolved into sobbing static, his body trembling as though already surrendered at the far threshold. The squad burst through into another corridor, the tremors following close. Behind them, the chamber collapsed fully, dunes crashing downward to fill the void. For a heartbeat, silence returned, smothered beneath tons of sand. But then, faintly, through dust-choked air, the rhythm resumed footsteps, deliberate and eternal, pressing forward no matter the weight above. Corda slammed his fist against the wall, his voice raw through vox. This wasn't discovery. This was arrival. His men stared back, their eyes wide, their silence heavier than fear, because the truth was no longer avoidable. The tomb had not been unearthed by chance. It had been timed. Every collapse, every fracture, every step had been the clock striking, and now the hour had come due. The tomb had never been ruined. it had been design. Every hall, every chamber, every artifact had not told a story of the past, they had prepared for a future. The explorers came as witnesses, not conquerors, and what they saw was not death, but continuation. Sarcophagi that breathed, engines that dreamed, voices that rewrote thought. None of it slept. It waited. And when the sand finally fell, when the hour struck, what rose was not resurrection, but inevitability. The galaxy believes in ages, in empires, in the rise and fall of dominions. But here, beneath dunes that had hidden perfection for 1,000 years, there was no cycle. There was only pause, a march interrupted, a throne reserved, a map not finished, but still being written in bone, on memory. On the very air the living dared to breathe, the explorers left nothing behind but their own absence. Their names, their voices, their steps all claimed, folded into a history older than Terra itself. And somewhere in the shifting sand above, new ranks stirred, new eyes opened, and green fire returned to a galaxy that had long forgotten its first rulers. The tomb had not awakened, it had resumed, and what waited inside was never meant to end.